I was chatting to a friend the other day, and he said to me, in his business, he doesn't want AI. He needs practical AI. And I looked at him and I thought, well, surely if AI is not practical, then what's the point? Let's talk about that. A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is an episode of Synthesis TV.
This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
Joining me in conversation today is Arakkal. She is a practice lead for intelligent data at Synthesis. Archie, welcome. How are you?
Howard. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It really irritated me, actually. And this is a smart guy. And he said, no. He needs practical AI. And I thought, well, hold on. Are we doing a poor job of communicating the whole idea of AI and what it can do for businesses?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially because AI is such a buzzwordy topic at the moment, there are so many people going out there busy selling the wrong marketing material around AI as opposed to speaking about the practicality behind it and how can we actually use it within a context of a business. And I think there's a lot of mismatch in terms of what AI can actually do versus what is being sold out there in the industry. And hopefully we can get to a point where people start understanding where the limitations are of AI and we can start practically implementing. Because it is great, the technology is great. It can do quite a lot. But if it's used in the wrong hands and used in the wrong context,
and used to sell the wrong thing, right,
then we've got problems.
So where do we need to begin? Do we need to try and understand, because there's large language models, there's ChatGPT, there's Gen AI. Is there a difference between all of these things? And do we need to understand them in order to decide what is best for our businesses?
Yeah, definitely. And I think knowledge is power, right? Within every single context, in every single domain, once you understand exactly what your technology is, what it means, how it all fits together, then that's the foundation of everything, right? So in this particular context, if we're talking about generative AI, large language models, ChatGPT, they're actually all different things. It's not the same thing. Right. And what I've seen with clients often is someone would refer to generative AI and think about ChatGPT at the back of their minds, or they may refer to ChatGPT and think of generative AI. So there is a distinction between the two, and if I can explain the difference.
Maybe do that, because certainly it would help me
definitely
in my conversations.
So I think if we think about AI and artificial intelligence as a whole, that's the loaded term
that's
for
the umbrella.
Everything. That's the umbrella for everything, right? Then we get into different levels. We get machine learning, you get deep learning, then you have generative AI. So machine learning is the construct of, it's almost baby artificial intelligence, if that makes sense, because you understand what your data is, you understand how it's being labeled.
So is that an example? An example would be that people who bought this pair of shoes also bought those.
Yes.
Is that
that's labeled data. It's exactly that, right? So now you're going down the context of machine learning. And that's more achievable because it has to do with what your current context is. And you're just trying to figure out patterns as a result of it. Then you get deep learning, which is a lot more smarter, and there's very little applied AI and practical AI use cases that have been put into production at the moment. There are some very cool use cases like AlphaGo as an example, and reinforcement learning, but we're not even going there right now. Then underneath that deep learning construct, you get generative AI. Now, even generative AI, the name says it all, actually. It's AI having the ability to create. That's what generative AI is. And that's just it's not limited to text. There's image generation, there's video generation, there's 3D modeling generation, there's text generation.
So because I'm a writer, I see it in the form of text, where I'll look at an email and I'll think, oh, geez, they've used ChatGPT. That's what that is.
That is generative AI.
They've used generative AI.
Yes. So AI, the AI construct that is able to create new content. And that's generative AI.
Got it.
But now
and you're saying, but that could be videos, images, logos, endless, actually.
Exactly. There's so many different modes and so many different channels in which you can actually create content. Now, I think the most mature and the one that's causing the most hype at the moment is, now under generative AI, you get text. And text, there you get large language models. And that's what's causing the most hype and the most attraction at the moment, is because it's speaking language, having the ability to speak language, having the ability to generate English or any other language, it's super exciting because it's the closest we've gotten to being human.
Right.
Right? And I think the way in which human beings have perceived intelligence in the past is being able to write or communicate and being able to write out language. And that's why it's causing hype as well as causing a lot of fear, because this is the first time where we're able
irritation.
And irritation, especially for writers and people and content creators.
So I don't mind if people, if it would come across well, but it actually sounds like it's been translated from another language by a second language English speaker. I don't know why it does.
And I can tell you why.
Your formidable client agrees that, it's like no one uses these words.
Because it's based on past data, right? I mean, if you're providing it with data from historical context, it's going to spit out that exact context that it's learned over time.
So it'll get better.
Of course it'll get better,
Right.
but it needs to, first thing is, there has to be an understanding that this is not intelligent natural language. This is natural language that is being processed.
I think
right?
and we somehow assume it is intelligent.
Exactly.
Because that's how we look at perceive intelligence.
We perceive intelligence by language. Yes. And that's why there's so much hype around it, because like, oh, wow, this is actually human now. It's not. We're far away from
It's just copying language patterns, actually.
Exactly. And that's why it's so relevant to what data you put in, because on the context of that data is the output that you get at the end of the day. So if you give a data from 1980s or the 1800s, that's where all the biases come in. That's where all the different types of writing comes in as well, because you're looking at historical data that isn't relevant to right now. But if on the other side, if we think of it from, okay, this is just a baseline, let's go above it and let's train it to become better over time. It's not intelligent.
Right.
That's a different context altogether.
Get it. Okay. So does that cover the different types of AI?
Like that definitely, I mean, in this particular context, when you're talking about text, and that's, I think, it's probably the most undervalued way of looking at generative AI, because sure, you can depict human language, but that's not what we're trying to get right. Human beings can language, right?
Right.
We can create content, which is wonderful. But the real value of large language models and generative AI as a whole is being able to think of a context that doesn't change so rigid, doesn't change too much, isn't too creative. So for example, have you worked with Photoshop? Mm-hmm. And that has a specific way of operating, right? You click on certain things and you can create an image. If we can train models to start understanding those different clicks, you're now telling the model, I want to create the front of a magazine with this particular color, and that's it. The clicks can happen behind the scenes, and that's where the real power is, because it's a very statistical way of doing things. There isn't too many probabilities of getting it wrong. There's a very controlled domain, and that's where the real power is. If we're going to try and make it create content that is supposed to be human, it's not going to work, because we can't make human beings into a little application.
And we need to be able to communicate what we want. Because that's the other thing that I find is, it's the instruction actually is the most important part of it, because there's no real intelligence there, so it needs to be instructed as to what I am looking for and what my company is looking for.
Exactly, and if we, as human beings, we're good at instructing, we're good at prompting. But what we find boring is being able to do the clicks on the application level and create the content from there off. But we can prompt. And now think of it this way, right? If you're creating content in Photoshop, you're clicking at least 20 times before you get your final product. Whereas if you just say one instruction, you're preventing that many clicks from happening. And rather, you just say that one instruction, you've saved time. Right. And that's where the real power is.
And you've got closer to the product that you're looking for. So understandably, it's very overwhelming, because most business owners and people who are running business are involved in the running of their business. They've got a very limited amount of time to look at this whole innovation thing. They may be struggling in their business. They are dealing with stuff on a daily basis. And then in the background, they're hearing AI, hype, take your business to the next level, to the future. I understand them saying, okay, not for me. When I see a product that I could use and it's underscored by AI, I get it. But right now, I'm focused on my business. obviously that's not a great way of looking at it, because there are advantages that they could have over their competitors right now. But where do they start? What do they look for? How does this process begin?
Yeah, and the answer to that question is actually quite simple. We may think it's very complicated. We have to find the perfect use case. The perfect use case is, where's your company burning at the moment? Where are their processes?
So look for your stress points.
Look for your stress points.
That's so
look
interesting.
for those points where you think there's too much processes happening at the moment. Currently people are spending 30 minutes longer getting something done, and that is actually probably the most ideal point of entering AI, completing those mundane tasks.
So in other words, sit down and look at your business and say, what am I dealing with most of the time? Am I dealing with customers who are complaining I haven't delivered what they wanted?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then there's my area. Maybe it's about that communication instruction from customers, order fulfillment, etc.
Exactly, and I think that's the real power of all of this, right?
Okay.
Because you're making it very real. And I think a lot of the time what I see our clients doing is, it's like, we need to do AI. We need to build this AI center of excellence. That's like the one thing. Second thing is, we need to fix all our data first before we can actually get any value. That's not the case. You don't need to do a big bang approach. Find something you're trying to solve, build iteratively, find the solution, get the solution to work, and then move to the next thing.
So in other words, you start with the problem within a certain area, and then you move out that way,
exactly.
rather than going back into all of your data, looking at the integrity of your data. It's too overwhelming.
Necessary. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like the integrity of data quality, all of that is important. But what I've found a lot of the time is people try and resolve those issues in isolation without really understanding what's driving those things. Whereas if you're following the driving points, then work backwards to finding out how can we get the most realistic way of solving that problem. So it may come down to a point where you need to solve a small subset of that data first and then move to the next one. But that's a better approach than having to go and solve the entire data estate and then building out small little use cases that don't really showcase the value. So rather work in small iterations, and it's all backed by a specific problem statement. So you have a way of continuously checking how you're doing across the board, rather than big bang approach.
And that could be contained. In other words, if I've got an online site for whatever it would be, and I'm seeing a certain problem, I could build that into the system, and then. And in fact, that'll start giving you other data as well, which, and I think which leads
one
to
of
the
my
next
favorite
thing.
use cases is claims processing as an example, right?
me.
It's probably the biggest pain point for a lot of like insurance companies, banking, whichever FSI we're talking about. Claims processing is probably the most difficult thing to solve for, because you have so many claims coming in. It's such a complex system you're trying to navigate. But the reality is, if you understand where the problem is there's several tools out there, but the real challenge is orchestration. What generative AI does best is actually orchestration, not chat, right? It has the ability to take your intent, human intent, convert it into an application language that can help you to construct a full end-to-end process.
Amazing.
That's what it's good at doing.
Right.
Not
And the
sure,
time and the
chat.
frustration that solves, it makes a very much happier customer.
Exactly, and that's the real value of all of this. Like going down the route of, let's build a chat interface that can understand human language, and what's the new assistant, basically called creating a financial advisor. That's all, sure, we will get to that point, but that's not a quick win. That'll take lots of time to get there.
Are there blind spots?
Yeah, there's several. I mean, I guess the biggest blind spot is firstly identifying the right use case, right?
Yes.
You have to find the right use case. You have to understand where the process is failing, and using that as your driving force, as opposed to using the hype cycle as your driving force.
Right.
So finding those particular points of interest, and secondly from there is, think of it as an orchestrated problem, rather than thinking of as a generative AI problem. Because if you think of it from that perspective, then it makes a lot more sense. You can start understanding what are all the different tools and applications you can start bringing together. You can understand what are all the different instructions you need to bring together. And if you think of it from that context, it changes the problem domain altogether.
Right. So as a practice lead of intelligent data at Synthesis, somebody comes to you with a problem. What is the process that you would take them through?
Yeah, and that's so. I mean, all of this is a reason why we've created this process, because of the frustration we're seeing at our clients. And understanding that generative AI, we really respect AI, and we really respect how much research has gone into it. But in order to make it practical and make it operational, there is a process of identifying where those use cases are. So at Intelligent Data, what we do is we follow this discovery process, which is essentially going to our clients, obsessing with the problem domain, understanding how are things currently operating, how should things operate in the future, what is the delta. Identifying that as a starting point, then understanding what is the most important thing that we need to achieve as a result of that entire delta that we've understood, then working backwards on the problem. What data do we have to supplement it? What tools do we have to supplement it? So we basically take the next approach of people, process, and technology and identify what do we need to achieve in order to find that proper use case that we can solve right now, and then we build a solution, rather than saying, let's use generative AI to solve all your problems.
So you start off with their business, with a challenge, and that's really where you walk around.
And that's the driving force, right? And it becomes such a powerful driving force because you can constantly keep measuring yourself. Because as an AI practitioner, it's so easy to go down the route of research and, finding the proper...
because it's exciting.
It's super exciting.
But it doesn't necessarily help a business.
Exactly. And I think another way that we think of it is, so typically there's two sort of ways in which you can think of a problem. There's a calculus way of thinking of a problem, and there's a statistical way of thinking of a problem. So what I mean by that, so if you are to find out what is the weather tomorrow, that's a statistical problem, right? It's based on the probability of whether something is going to rain or not.
Okay.
If you're thinking about calculus, it's astronomy, right? So when is the next eclipse going to happen?
Okay.
Right? So those are the two different ways you can think of a problem. So generative AI is actually a statistical problem. So it requires very ring-fenced ways of doing things. It requires very specific tool sets that you need to leverage.
And bringing in the relevant information to use in your
model. Where the problem that is happening at the moment is everyone's thinking about it as a calculus problem.
That's very interesting.
That's
a great way of looking at it, actually. That is unfortunately all we have time for. Tana Arakkal, who is a lead at Synthesis, talking to me about AI, some of the challenges, and certainly answered a lot of my questions. If you want more information, well, reach out, comment below. You can always reach out to info@Synthesis and let us know what you're dealing with. We'll get back to you. I'm Howard Feldman. This is a episode of Synthesis TV.